So, Stephen, we are live.
Wow. Okay.
Uh,
You achieved. I'm very brave here.
you are very brave, yes. And that's not a corona cough. So, Stephen Pohlmann, we're going to start out with our jingle. You're our guest today. Um, Pour yourself a glass of something, and we're starting.
This is. We'll be talking about these.
Of course, we will, but we start with the jingle.
Get a chair or grab a seat, or we'll sweep you off your feet. We groove, you got Mel. Ease your legs, rest a while, all you gotta do is smile. We're swell, can't you tell? You got Mel. When the show begins, you better hold on tight, or before you know it, you'll be high as a kite. Take a break, settle down, we're the only show in town. It's our road, don't you know? You got Mel. Give it up, don't think twice, we're a hurricane on ice. What the hell, give it yell, ring a bell, show and tell. Mademoiselle, give it smell, you got Mel.
You've got Mel. And Mel has the one and only Stephen Pohlmann. So, Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. You're a bit quiet there, but can you put your volume up?
I'll be noisy now. So Stephen, you are a real enigma. You have a very interesting family name. Let's start by telling the viewers who you are and where you come from.
I am English, but in England, when we grew up, they called us the Continentals because my parents were from Austria and Austria and Czechia.
So where did you actually grow up? Where were you born?
Born in London. I'm actually born within the sound of the Bow Bells. I'm a Cockney.
You're a Cockney, and your parents. A few words about your parents.
Viennese and Czech and Austrian.
Okay, and your dad was
My
was an actor. He was.
They were both actors. In fact, they met when after he escaped from Austria. They met in Brno in Czechia. And then they escaped from there, eventually arrived in 30, my father in early 39 in London.
Okay. And you grew up in East London?
West London. No, I won't go through the whole story, but I didn't know where the nearest synagogue was, let's put it that way, because I grew up in a slightly strange way in West London, in Kensington, Holland Park.
Okay, great. You grew up in a strange way, in a Jewish manner of speech.
Yes, in Jewish manner of speech, in a strange way, because my mother's family had converted to Catholicism around the time of her birth, which was the turn of the century. So very pre-Hitler, but for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure. And our parents decided that Catholic was the best for us because that was the one. My father knew nothing much about his Judaism. My mother knew quite a lot about Catholicism, so we grew up Catholics.
So until what age were you a Catholic?
Well, it depends what you mean. When you say Catholic, you don't always mean the same as when you say I'm Jewish. I actually am, by religion, a kind of lapsed Catholic or liberal now, or almost atheist. By blood, I'm Jewish. By birth, I'm Jewish. My mother's family were Jewish. My mother's parents, despite their conversion, their names appear on the wall of one of the synagogues in Czechia as victims in Auschwitz.
Wow.
So, in that sense, we're Jewish.
Your grandparents?
My grandparents, yes.
Yeah. But as growing up, what, did you go to church, or were you in the choir?
Went to church. I was in the choir. In fact, I still today, the headmaster of my school, and I am in touch with the current headmaster. He tells me I still am the one who lived closest to the school. I literally was in voice throwing. If I wanted to, I could wait for the bell to start ringing, leave home, and arrive at the school before it stopped ringing. And the headmaster was a Jesuit priest. There were Jesuit priests running the school, and I served mass for him for 2 years.
Do you remember anything from that period? Can you
What's that?
can you sing in Latin?
I can Pater Noster, quies in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat. I can do the whole. I do quite a lot of the liturgy in Latin. Yes.
Wait, but does it come with a tune?
No, we didn't. That's a good question. I didn't. There, of course, were high mass with music, but I was always early morning on his own with in most cases, nobody watching.
Okay. So you grew up as a Christian.
Yes.
In West London.
Yes.
And then what happened?
In the sense of discovering my Judaism, or what?
For example, yeah.
My wife gets very annoyed when I come on the subject because it was not. Many Christians don't realize that there is this thing about religion and people. And I grew up, there was no denial, there was no hidden, and yet we just didn't discuss the fact. It was no big deal but still we went to our Jewish cousins' weddings and bar mitzvahs. So I was aware of them, and I considered them, because I hadn't studied the subject, I considered them my Jewish cousins. It is a bit strange, and
So they considered you their Gentile cousins.
Well, my poor grandmother, she was very sweet. She was seeing some of her family going in the wrong directions. I only have the one grandmother. When I eventually married an Israeli girl, she couldn't let go of her hand. That was a really big thing for her. So I was coming back.
Okay, so how did you come back?
Fell in love with an Israeli girl who happened to be Jewish. That's about it. And in fact, I would have had to convert had I wanted to get married by a rabbi in the diaspora in London. But
wow.
here in Israel, the rabbis are more liberal because there is no civil wedding, and therefore they don't ask so many questions. So I answered all the questions truthfully, and there's one or two questions they didn't ask, and so I was able to get married here as a Jew. And I had my father's brother was living here. His family had come here, so I had him as my witness at the rabbinate and all these things. So I went through I was Jewish enough.
That's incredible. So how do you just had a birthday, by the way, so happy birthday. If you had to define yourself, how would you define, most of us grow up one thing or another thing.
Well, it depends who's asking and what they mean. I mean, some people say, "Are you Jewish?" And depending on how much time I've got and my interest in the person, I might say, "What do you mean by that question?" And then they say, "Well, what do you mean by that?" Well, I don't know what I mean. I mean, they get confused. So I'm certainly Jewish, but I actually am a Catholic Jew, and I'm also. Now there is such a thing called Israeli, and I'm Israeli. Now I've got my Israeli citizenship, but before I used to be an English Catholic Jew. Which, that was now I'm bi-citizen.
So you're British, you're Israeli, you're a Catholic, you're a Jew, you're everything. You're everything.
Yeah. So whoever takes over this country, I can escape quite easily. So.
Or not, as the case may be.
Or not.
Yeah. So Stephen, and we've also met under two different hats, which is quite incredible. Do you want to mention that briefly?
Well, yes. From '64, I've been in the dental sales business. My original boss was my father's best friend from Vienna, who set up in America, he was the world leading export agent, primarily for American dental products. And I met you living here in Israel 30 years ago, when you're a microbiologist, and you brought out some beautifully flavored mouthwash for Colgate, which Colgate grabbed. And
eventually.
Yeah, and you were involved in the dental business. I'm not actually sure how and when, and we may have met at an exhibition or such, but when I read about your about ourbooks.com in the Jerusalem Post, I said, I know that guy from somewhere. And then I remembered. So.
And then we took up our friendship, which has blossomed. And you become one of the major writers on our books.
Yeah, it's a bit cheating, but I like writing. Actually, one of the books are books. The about 50 books, mixture of what they are. But the cheating is that I've been writing for about 20 years now a letter from Israel, which is a bit like a blog, because I realized very quickly that this country needs someone to needs many people to tell the story, because you don't get the story in the papers, and people make up their opinions about this country very quickly, rightly or wrongly, or positive or negative, whatever the word is. And I just wanted to tell my side to the people I know. So I started this email sending, and each one of them appears as a book in another section of our book. So I've got about 370 of those. So,
which makes you one of the top authors.
Yeah, it's a little
also,
bit cheap.
But they're ebooks, so it's okay. And you're also one of our best supporters in so many ways. So Stephen, what did you study? What were your specialties growing up as a young person?
I wasn't a great studier, and I don't think I intended to use my studies in my life. I quite quickly became just a salesman. I like music, I like writing, I like traveling, I like meeting people, I like telling stories, and those are not necessarily the best for a good job. So when my father's best friend, who had no kids of his own, so there was a prospect of eventually taking over the company, he offered me a job in the international sales business. That was ideal. And 55 years in it.
Wow. And did you eventually take over the company?
No, because that's also an interesting question, because I was offered everything at a time where he was considering selling the company. It was either that, or for continuity, or pass it on to someone like his son. And I would have had to then live in America with all the benefits. He was going to give me some land and property, and I really, it was quite a setup, and I didn't want to become American. That's a dangerous thing to say, but this was 50 years ago. No, it's 71. Yes, 50 years ago, where I said I want to remain European. I don't want to move to America. In hindsight, I don't know, no regrets. Silly to regret anything, but so I didn't take over the company, and it was eventually became corporate, and since then I've been running away from corporate.
And recently you had an exit from your previous company.
Well, about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, again, the company that I was with for actually 24 years, and that did very well, was taken over by a corporate. And I'm not a corporate man, so I was paid out. And instead of retiring, I discovered again something, a small dental product, which at the moment is, I would say, frozen because of Corona. So it's not a bit silly now to promote it, but I was enjoying myself with that. And but Corona came along, and here I am talking to you.
It's a lovely product. I'll just mention what it is if you don't. It's an electronic flossing device.
Well, no, not flossing. It's actually an interdental brush.
Okay.
Flossing is flossing with a floss. The brush is the brush. So you've got these interdental brushes, and this is the first of the electric ones, called U-Brush. U-Brush, everybody.
Me Brush.
U-Brush.
And it's a very good product, so I wish you luck with that.
Thank you.
But I think that the most, I wanted to say exciting, a little bit eccentric. You have one of the most eccentric hobbies that I know of. You know, some people collect stamps, some people collect coins, but you collect glasses that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. What is that about? Do you have a specimen to show us?
Yes, of course. I purposely bought 2 of them here.
Don't break them on our show.
These are 18th century English drinking glasses. And one of them, as you see, has even a broken foot because it's such a fantastic glass that it's very high value even with the new foot. English glass, well, first of all, how I came to it, my father started, I went with my father to Portobello Market. I grew up at Portobello Market.
Ah, okay.
Okay, every week with my father. My father, by the way, was, it's worth looking up on internet. Eric Pohlmann was a corpulent, large, well-known character actor who, when he went back to his original German in the mid-60s, became quite a star in Germany and Austria. And when he entered the arena or area, people said, that's somebody special, or that's Eric Pohlmann. And so going with him to the market was a lot of fun. And I'm not sure how he started, but he started collecting glasses. And I know his collection. It so happens I don't have it, but it's with my stepmother. That's another story. But his collection is not the highest value, but it was picked with love. So I know every piece, and so that's the first step, that I knew glass. I knew his love for the glass. And then when he remarried in '76 and moved out of the house and went to live somewhere else, I was given the job of putting all these glasses into a suitcase and taking them for valuation, insurance purposes. And I literally did that, suitcase with newspaper, about 50 pieces. And I looked up in the yellow pages for a glass dealer, found a couple of little old brothers. And I was fascinated by the way they would take a glass and put it to the side and say, oh, this, and within minutes, they knew his glass and they knew the approximate value. And I said, how do you do that? He said, we know glass, we're passionate, we love glass. And I spent 2 or 3 hours with them, and they got me. They
hooked you.
They hooked me. And to cut it shorter, because I'm already talking too much, in the late 17th century, about 1675, it was in England that they introduced lead oxide into glass and changed the world of glass. Glass suddenly became heavier, softer, stronger, better reflection, color, everything. And engravers went crazy because now you could engrave without it breaking every second day. And it was just made glass more beautiful. And that lasted for about until the mid 18th century, that glass was called English glass. It was possibly made by Englishmen in Norway or in Holland or so, but usually made in England, but it was associated with English glass. And that for 50, 60, 70 years, the best glass in the world was English. And the engraving, these two here are both stipple engraved, which means they're engraved not with lines, but with dots. And it's unbelievable. If you were able to see this clearly, it looks like a painting, and yet all of it is done by hand. I mean, today they can do it with a machine, but by hand, with about 7 or 8 dots per second by hand. So it's a lovely subject, and with all the twists, and you may see here the twists and curls and styles, and there are a lot. It's surprising. You may just call it English glass, but there's quite a variety.
So you collect English glass here in Israel?
I think I'm either the only collector in Israel who has English glass, or there's one other who doesn't want to be identified. And actually, in my 36 years in Israel, that's another story. I've never had an expert looking at my glass. And I've got 2 experts, fellow collectors, one from England, one from France, both English, who are coming with their wives in October, which means, of course, they're not coming, but they plan to come for a week to Israel, during which time they would spend time looking at my glass. So that's, again, postponed.
So the broken glass that you showed us, how much is that worth on the glass market?
That's dangerous, to tell you that.
More than $20,000?
Yes.
Okay, and it's broken.
And this was broken. If it were not broken, and there are by the way, you can look this guy up because the artists. By the way, people who made glass, 99.9% of glass made in those days, you haven't the faintest who made it. They don't put their names on. 90% of engravers did not sign their glass, not a lot. This glass happened to be signed, and it's signed by Frans Greenwood, Dutch. The Dutch were the greatest of engravers in those days. And so you can look up on the Google Frans Greenwood and see what a glass of his would be worth, and it's there.
So, and you're not worried about breaking them?
No, collectors aren't. Only the people who look at them. It's really funny. I've given lectures on this, and I went to, in fact, I went on Eilat, at the Dan Hotel in Eilat. I gave a lecture, and I sent 20 pieces down there in a suitcase or wrapped up or in boxes, and I let people handle them, and of course, hardly anybody dared go near them. But as you see, I handle them. Yeah,
because I know you quite well, and I don't think I've ever actually handled one of your glasses. But Stephen, this is very interesting. What is the psychology here that I'm afraid to touch them, and you handle them without any fear of dropping one? Oops, $20,000.
Well,
oops.
Glass collectors. I actually wanted to write a book, and I still will, on the effect of the noise of glass crashing on glass collectors. And I do have one or two very scary stories. I mean, we're talking about major catastrophes. It's just not a factor. I found that this is beautiful. If you've seen glass being made, it's a beautiful thing to watch, like pottery or such. There's something beautiful in it. Because it's so delicate, it makes it in some way also beautiful, like a beautiful body. I mean, other people will look at it and not see that. And by the way, when people come to look at my glass who don't know about glass, they quite often will pick the least valuable as the most popular. And the reason is quite clear that, first of all, something which will raise the value of something is rarity. So this is the only glass with this particular picture by this artist. Okay, so it's unique. But when they made glass in general, the popular ones will be made in their millions. So today, there are still quite a few of those beautiful ones available. Yeah. They will cost.
Stephen, this is incredible. If I were a glass collector and I were on your show, I would bring my cheapest glass to show. And you're bringing some of your best specimens. Right?
You're actually right there. It's a bit silly. Maybe I'm a Schwitzer, because the lesser expensive, and I should have, that's very silly, the lesser expensive ones are very pretty often.
That's fine. I'm happy you brought
that's possibly what you're right, actually. I should have bought also, or instead of, I should have bought even the prettier ones, and you'll say, isn't that pretty? You know,
I'm really incredibly impressed. So yeah, let's now talk about Stephen in Israel. So, do you feel like you're an Israeli here?
Unfortunately,
you call yourself an Israeli. 1 second. You've raised 2 Israeli kids, and you have several Israeli grandchildren. Are you Israeli?
It's a point of view.
Your point of view.
It's really a point of view, because the Israelis will certainly look at me as a foreigner. And my Hebrew is not good, and I'm very annoyed and embarrassed about that. And I really should do something about that, because obviously I'm missing out on a lot. But when I go abroad, I've learned in my 40, 50 years of traveling as an Israeli person who lives in Israel to stop wasting time and explaining and all this. I'm now a proud Israeli. I'm not arrogant, but when you read about, or many of the people I meet who read about Israel, as I said, I write my letter from Israel, they get the wrong story. So I'm quite aggressive in saying, I live in Israel. I'm an Israeli. Yes, I'm Israeli. I don't waste time. You know, it's interesting that because I was asking some some Jews. It's a favorite question of mine. How do you identify yourself as Jewish or Israeli? And there are many, of course, who have a new identity, and Jews are worried about that, and that's called Israeli. Of course, the religious are very worried about that. So that's another quite a big subject as to the future identity of the Jewish people.
And you're worried about that?
No, many are. No, I'm interested in that. I'm not worried about it because I sometimes I think I grew up not liking flags and national anthems. I got that from my father. It annoyed me. Borders annoyed me. I used to travel before the European Union through all these bloody borders, and it was terrible. And the way each country looked at each other just because they crossed the border, it was very sad. So in certain ways, another identity, another difference is frustrating. But the story of the Jews is a special one.
So, and another very interesting thing about you is that you are not a spring chicken, and yet you're a very agile guy. You play tennis, you walk. You're a sports person. You have all of these different facets about you.
I grew up sporty, and I unfortunately overweight all my life, and I was stupidly proud to be better than people expected because they expected this overweight person not to be whatever I was, instead of losing weight and being normal. So I will die on the tennis court. Oh, sorry.
Is that what you think? Is that what you think?
No, but I won't stop, and I love that, and then I get on my bike, and I like being on my bike, and I'm questioning that sometimes I'm getting to the age where electric might be a factor because it is a form of transport, and sometimes I need a form of transport rather than the exercise. But I love getting out on the bike.
That's right. I forgot about the bicycles. So Stephen, this has been incredible. Is there anything that I've forgotten that you want to talk about?
Being in the parents being in the acting world is quite fun. I just imagine that the movies. My father, according to IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, he's over 200 appearances.
Wow.
And it's interesting, my parents both died quite young, relatively young. When I see them, they're my parents, they look old. And yes, I'm now 10 years older than they were when they died. So that's an interesting, having entertainers in the family gives you a slightly different, I think, a better view of your parents, of your family, the background. It's nice.
So at some stage in my interviews, I always ask the wonderful people I'm interviewing about the Beatles. But actually, you grew up with the Beatles.
I went to the Christmas show down the road at the Hammersmith Odeon. I went to all the big shows in the early days. I saw the Stones at Notting Hill Gate in a nightclub there. So, and Tommy Steele. In fact, I just was. I've got a picture I could get very quickly of my father with Tommy Steele because my father did a movie with him, a movie with Cliff Richards. So I grew up with that crowd, and
So who is it for you, the Beatles or the Stones?
Beatles. I was a Beatles fan. I appreciate the Stones, and when I see them now or hear them, which is I don't want to hear them every minute, they're fantastic. But I was a Beatles guy. They were brilliant.
I'm going to put you on the spot now and ask you for your favorite Beatles song. I know it's almost impossible.
It used to be Good Morning. Is it Good Morning Sunshine? Good Day Sunshine. But I fell in love with Blackbird very late.
Good Day Sunshine.
And Blackbird for me is a clever song. I enjoy listening. It's one that I can listen to now because all my favorite music, I've got all my favorite records everywhere. But if I play them 2 or 3 times, I get fed up with them because I've heard them a million times. Blackbird, I can hear more often.
Can you hum a few bars? You have a beautiful voice.
Someone playing in the buzzard la. I don't know the words.
Pick them up.
La 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 la. La la la. La 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 la.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And a baritone voice at that.
Yeah, we can do it. And I like opera, by the way. I grew up with opera. I was an opera fanatic. So that's another thing we didn't talk about. I spent a year at the Metropolitan Opera online, Vienna Opera, when I lived there. I was lucky when I lived in New York that was the year the Met moved from their old location to their new. And I grew up with that. I really was a fanatic. So that's another story.
We'll leave that for another time,
Yeah.
because my knowledge of opera is not close to zero. It is zero. But we have what to talk about the next time we have coffee, which I hope is going to be very soon. Stephen, you're a man of many surprises, and happy birthday, and keep surprising us, and may we have many, many coffees together.
Thank you very much.
Stephen Pohlmann, thank you very much for being on. You've got Mel. And put your glasses away carefully, please.